Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. BC's first case of the Omicron variant as the feds bring in more air travel restrictions. Also,
it seems like we're okay. I think I do still have a lot of fear of the water coming over Sumas border. And
when will it stop? Another dump of rain and outpouring of support as communities just try to hang on. And why BC truckers say something has to change with billions of dollars worth of goods stalled.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We're going to get to the flooding situation in a moment, but let's start with the first case of the COVID-19 Omicron variant in BC. Now, when Omicron was first detected overseas, Canadian government moved quickly to restrict travel from certain countries. Yesterday, the BC government implemented extra testing for some travelers coming in, and that has resulted in this case. Belle Puri joins us live with more. Belle, how much more do we know about the Omicron here in BC?
This first case of Omicron in BC is in the Fraser Health region in a person who had been in Nigeria. What we know is so far a total of 204 people in BC have recently returned from areas in the southern part of Africa where the variant was first detected. All of them have been given the molecular PCR test for COVID-19. All are in self-isolation. The Omicron case, it was identified through whole genome sequencing.
The level of concern is at watchful level. It is something that we are paying attention to. We're doing additional enhanced surveillance. So I mentioned we do whole genome sequencing of any positive international traveler, and that's how we identified the person who was positive today.
Health officials say so far the genome sequencing has indicated the new variant isn't widespread in BC, but then they follow up with not widespread yet. Right now, 99.6% of COVID cases in BC are variants of the Delta strain.
Okay, so even though the Omicron is still such a tiny chunk of cases in Canada, one in BC, the feds are bringing in new measures to deal with the variant. Tell us about that.
The situation is that incoming air travelers from all countries, except the United States, will be required to take COVID-19 tests when they get here, regardless of their vaccination status. They'll also have to self-isolate until those test results come in. Now, all of that goes into effect over the next few days. The new measure is part of Canada's rapidly evolving strategy to contain the spread of the variant. At YVR this afternoon, we talked to some travelers.
I tried to get home. I was supposed to come on Friday, so I came a few days earlier not knowing what the next step was going to be.
I'm glad I'm in Canada now because I was so worried when I was in my home country because they just banned the flight. They just banned for like a month.
This is a work trip for me, so making sure it's in a relatively low transmission zone as much as possible.
Well, I wasn't really thinking about it or worried because there was just like South Africa, but then we got off the plane just now when I learned that they were like testing everybody starting tonight. And I just got randomly selected for a test right now, so that was a fun experience I wasn't expecting.
Canada has also expanded its ban on travelers from several countries in Africa. Today, it added Egypt, Malawi, and Nigeria to last week's list of 7 nations. Omicron was first identified in the southern region of Africa, but it remains unclear exactly where or when it first emerged. And people had traveled to Canada from the countries in question days before the ban was put in place. As well, today's case in BC, the variant has already been found in Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. Federal health officials say there are at least 6 cases in the country.
All right, we'll be watching all of this very closely. Belle Puri live for us tonight. Thanks, Belle. And starting today, there are new rules for religious gatherings to help fight transmission. Worship services in BC must be limited to 50% capacity unless everyone is vaccinated. Everyone, regardless of vaccination status, must also now wear a mask unless there are ceremonies that involve eating or drinking. The larger restrictions in Northern Health will now end on January 31st of next year. And Interior Health is lifting its regional restrictions on gatherings and events, allowing people to host gatherings in their homes and indoor events to return to full capacity with proof of vaccination. It comes as BC, for the first time since the beginning of October, records no new COVID deaths. There are 358 new cases today. Nearly 85% of eligible people 5 and older in this province have received their first dose of the vaccine. And later in the show, we'll bring you more coverage of the emergence of the Omicron variant in Canada and around the world. Let's get to that flooding situation now. Impacts are being felt far beyond the south coast. Communities are already asking for emergency aid, but we're going to start tonight with Renee Filipponi, who is showing us that some say they're not actually getting the help they need.
As the third atmospheric river poured over Abbotsford, the volunteers did not stop, preparing sandbags to be delivered to anyone in need.
Farms, homes, people who just want to cover their doorstep, barns, animals.
Desperate to protect their homes from more flooding, residents came to pick up supplies.
We're fortunate. We had 1 inch. We have friends who had 3 feet. Other friends had 7 feet and lost their homes.
The city says there is localized flooding and small landslides, but repairs to the dikes have held up.
I am confident that we have done all that we can do to keep our community safe as we go through this final weather event for this week anyway.
Snowmelt is adding to the problem, flowing into already full rivers, and many areas are at an increased risk of avalanches. The rain was also intense on Vancouver Island and BC's central coast. The province is warning people to stay home and off major highways.
Safety remains our key consideration, and if required, we will preemptively close more highways.
That person's house would have been probably somewhere about there.
Further up the Fraser Valley, near Hope, the rushing water continues to cause destruction. The regional district says it has been asking the province for help and is not getting what it needs.
Currently, we have funding requests for critical infrastructure, such as the Wilson Road Dike, where there are homes on the verge of falling into the river and they need help today.
In response, the province says local governments can take immediate action without provincial approval.
We're doing everything we can to make sure people and communities have the resources and supports that they need.
Heading towards our barns as well.
Meanwhile, on the ground, some can only watch as the water moves in.
We're only into the first 10 hours of this next storm. If it lasts the next 2 days, I think we're going to be into the same situation we were before.
Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Abbotsford.
Okay, and this flooding is reaching new areas. Joel Ballard is live tonight, also in Abbotsford. And Joel, while it's still bad there where you are, take us through what else we're seeing tonight.
Yeah, so Anita, other cities like Maple Ridge are also experiencing this intense rainfall. Further east from there, Mission, Hatzick, they're also being really hard hit by this rain. If we take a look at Hatzick Island, there have been evacuation orders. We know that some parts of the water is rising up to 10 inches deep there. It's traveling into people's basements. Over in Mission, there are mudslides, mud everywhere. There's also search and rescue teams that have been called out for a number of rescues. So there's just a lot going on right across the Fraser Valley tonight, and a lot for us to keep a lookout on. But first, let's take a closer look at what's happening here where I am.
The relentless rain has flooded more roads in Abbotsford today.
We're seeing all that water that's come through yesterday on the Nooksack across boundary, and it's slowly coming away through the Sumas Prairie area here, and now crossing the road, making its way in kind of the natural form of landscape where it's kind of lower and flowing out to Highway 1.
The water crossing Vi Road close to the U.S. border, and it's not stopping, traveling further north and again further north all the way to the iconic Castle Fun Park. And with a warning the downpour could last 48 hours, there's no time for the already flooded areas to naturally recede.
If the rain stopped now, this water's going to sit here probably for about another 12 hours or so as it naturally flows, but we have a lot of water pooling out in the prairie that's got to go through, only a couple ways to get out to the Fraser, so it's going to take time for that to go down.
But for now, there's nowhere for the water to go except up. As it rises, it's crossing more roads, banks, and barriers. And with that fear, the community isn't letting up. 2 weeks since this first began, this spot at Albert Dick Park is just one of many where volunteers are connecting people whose properties are at risk with the supplies they need.
We're getting addresses from our Facebook group in order to deliver sandbags to community members.
More than 10,000 members have joined the Facebook group Fraser Valley Flood Help.
We've had hundreds and hundreds of people show up and offer their support and their resources, their time. There's people who are using their own gas money to bring these sandbags to people's homes. So really it's just the entire community. Everyone is just stepped up.
Including volunteer Kulwant Gill, spending her lunch break slinging sandbags.
Just seeing the stories and hearing the devastation and the total loss, of course it's going to impact us all, right? We're human beings, and we're trying to do our part in whatever way we can.
And though everyone is tired, they say there are lessons to be learned.
I would say to everybody out in the community that hasn't been affected, use today to change someone's tomorrow. Get out there and help. I mean, it really makes a big difference.
That sentiment needed now more than ever. These volunteers know the aftermath from one of the largest disasters this country has ever seen will take years of work to recover from.
Anita, there's also a small bit of good news. The mayor of Abbotsford, Henry Braun, said today that despite this heavy rainfall, flood modeling for the region shows that those flood levels are actually stabilizing and should be stabilized for the next couple days. But with that good news also comes a warning from the Abbotsford police that residents need to stay prepared and on top of it because, as we've seen over the past 2 weeks, the situation really can change minute to minute. Anita?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. Joel Ballard live for us tonight in Abbotsford. Thanks, Joel. Now over to another region worn out by floods. Crews in Merritt have had more ability to contain damage from the storm this third time around.
It's actually less than half of what we got 2.5 weeks ago. We didn't have any overland flooding from that, which was fantastic news. The reinforced dikes that we put in place held.
But Merritt officials say there's still more water to come. They're closely watching the rain falling in the Coquihalla Mountains and how much of that flows down the Coldwater River. To prepare for the worst, crews put in more dikes and flood defenses, including more supports for the city's wastewater treatment plant. As for the new river course, the floods carved up while crews managed to reroute the majority of water back to its original course with riprap. That will hold up temporarily, and they're still looking for more long-term solutions. The city of Merritt is also planning on giving day access to property owners most devastated by the floods by this Friday. And a warning from Avalanche Canada tonight telling people to stay out of the backcountry after a deadly avalanche in northern BC on Saturday.
Given the state of the roads, given the reduced capacity for rescue during times like this, as well as extreme avalanche danger, really the best advice right now is to wait this one out.
RCMP say a group of 3 snowmobilers got swept up near Chetwynd after another sledder triggered an avalanche. 2 people managed to dig themselves out. A third person was buried and did not survive. Extreme conditions are forecast for several parts of BC, including the Sea to Sky region, until at least the weekend. This is the first fatal slide of the season. Meanwhile, we've seen over the last 2 weeks, roads have been flooded out and devastating mudslides have happened. So as a precaution, the provincial government is again closing some major highways tonight as this third storm rains down, and the transportation minister is warning more closures could come. Dan Merritt is on this story for us tonight and joins us live. Dan, what is shut down right now?
Highway 99 north of Whistler closed. This is the same stretch where 5 people were killed by that mudslide more than 2 weeks ago. Take a look at this map. 99 to the left is closed between Pemberton and Lillooet. Further north, a travel advisory is now in place on Highway 20 near Bella Coola. The province says avalanche teams are ready to respond, and it recommends people to stay off the roads there. Closer to the coast, Highway 1 is shut down between Chilliwack and Merritt. That's McCallum Road to Yale Road, Chilliwack to Abbotsford, McCallum Road to Yale Road. It's also closed between Popcom and Hope. The crippled Coquihalla still locked down between Hope and Merritt, and devastated Highway 8 is closed between Merritt and Spence's Bridge. The transportation minister warns the government may preemptively close more highways as rain falls on already soaked ground.
Highway 1 is the single most important artery in the Lower Mainland. And when it's closed for an extended period, I know that it's difficult and very challenging for people. The same goes for Highway 7, which is restricted to essential traffic. And I know this is challenging for people who have to go to work or school or have appointments that they have scheduled. And I ask employers to continue to be as flexible as you can with your employees over these next few days.
As for when Highway 99 might reopen, at least, the Transportation Ministry says that will depend on what they find tomorrow morning amid this latest heavy storm. And again, the province suggests if you do not have to travel, do not go out. And if you do, remember that 30-litre per fill-up rule has been extended for all non-essential vehicles for at least another 2 weeks. Anita.
Dan Barrett live tonight. Thank you, Dan. Well, the Canadian National Railway Company has once again shut down its service to Vancouver because of rain, flooding and landslides. CN says it moved 7 trains during the weekend, but has decided to close its network because the rain was causing increased debris and landslide activity. The rail company says crews are working to find a safe and effective way of stabilizing the infrastructure along the key freight corridor. CN has been able to divert some rail traffic to the Port of Prince Rupert, which remains fully operational and is not impacted by severe weather. Time now to bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Joe, I can see you're just getting drenched out there. How much worse is it going to get tonight?
Anita, it really depends on where you are across the South Coast. And right now in North Vancouver, we're seeing some of the heaviest rain anywhere across Metro Vancouver and, in fact, across the Lower Mainland. It is coming down very heavily. It has been relentless through the day, but the rainfall variation with this event is extreme. You know, parts of Richmond, Delta, White Rock, maybe just 5 to 10 millimeter story up in the North Shore, and definitely where Dan was pointing out those road closures up near Pemberton and closer up the coast to Bella Coola. This is a 200 millimeter rain event. Let me show you the satellite and radar, starting off with the water vapor. This is how much precipitable rain is available in the atmosphere, and you can see it stretching across the Western Pacific rather than our classic Pineapple Express event. So it's coming in from a very different direction, and we're seeing different kinds of rain shadows. One of them is towards the southwestern sections of Metro Vancouver. This is a look at the current radar, and where you see those yellows, that's the intense downpour. Maple Ridge, we are hearing of a lot of localized flooding. Same story out towards Chilliwack. But then you get down towards Abbotsford and the border, not quite as much, although we're still looking at rainfall totals that could be close to 80, 90 millimeters even in through the southern Fraser Valley. So quite a varied storm. But when all is said and done, everyone getting hit for a few more hours. We've got a few more intense bands of rain to move in overnight. And then again tomorrow morning. So, Anita, we may see things ease, but we're not in the clear yet. It's not until tomorrow afternoon that we get to say goodbye to this one. So a few more hours yet to go.
Okay, we'll be waiting. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
An Australian man has been arrested after trying to smuggle several kilograms of methamphetamine inside a painting. Canada Border Services officers inspected a package destined for Western Australia and stumbled upon the drugs. An international sting operation involving the RCMP, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Australian Federal Police then followed. The authorities put the package back into circulation with a placebo in place of the drugs. Once in Australia, police followed the painting to its final destination, where they executed a search warrant and found 4.1 kilograms of meth. 38-year-old man is now facing drug charges in Australia. And it's been years in the making, but now the independent Surrey police force is working on its first shifts in the city.
Yesterday, as some of our officers began their shift in this building, we marked the beginning of Surrey's police transition, which has been in the works for the past 3 years.
Starting today, 29 officers from the Surrey Police Service are being paired with Surrey RCMP officers to patrol the city. It's part of a staggered transition where Surrey Police and the RCMP will work together for the next few months. In the next few weeks, another 21 Surrey Police officers will hit the streets with their RCMP counterparts. During this transition period, the new officers will be driving RCMP vehicles. Well, it's been 1 year since a report recommended 24 steps to address anti-Indigenous racism in BC healthcare. Tonight, its author says little progress has been made. Mary Ellen Turpin-Lafond says First Nations leaders and the provincial government leaders have made some headway on a quarter of her recommendations, but not where it's most needed. She says Aboriginal patients continue to disproportionately die as a result of the impacts of racism and the two ongoing public health emergencies. Health Minister Adrian Dix promised the creation of a task force to implement the recommendations. Let's make this season kind at CBC British Columbia's Food Bank Day. Last year, we raised a record-breaking amount of money for local food banks across BC, and we want to do the same this year. Kick off the holiday season with a day of festive programming and connect with your favorite CBC personalities at our virtual open house in your house. Join us online and on Radio 1 on December 3rd. Okay, so Food Bank Day is coming up, as you just saw. That's happening on Friday. Now, with BC's supply chains being ripped apart right now, we know that the most vulnerable people in this province are being hit hard, and that has everything to do with the food bank. The CBC's Michelle Gussoub is looking at concerns about food supply at these banks heading into their busiest month.
Hello, can I see your pen? It's a busy morning at the Richmond Food Bank, where demand is up 7% in the past month. Ongoing challenges with the supply chain are making it hard to maintain business as usual.
Any supply chain issue or any increase to food prices definitely increases the number of people that are accessing the food bank.
So far, the food bank here in Richmond has managed to keep up enough supply. You certainly won't find any empty shelves here. And they're even sending some of their food to the food bank in Chilliwack, which has been much harder hit by the floods. Still, there are some items that have become difficult to come by.
We usually provide eggs and they are back ordered. Hopefully it will even itself out as the highways and the roads are opening up, so I'm just hopeful.
Local businesses are also stepping up to make sure food bank shelves stay full. Much of the fresh produce you see here rescued from grocers that would otherwise have thrown it away. Some of those supplies also going to farmers, much of their animal feed lost in the floods.
We make sure that anything that is edible goes to hunger relief organisations to be turned into meals. Anything that is no longer appropriate for human consumption will be diverted to farmers for animal feed.
While the sight of empty grocery store shelves can make it tempting to stock up, food banks are asking people to resist the urge to panic buy.
Just leave some for the people who need it, and especially the essentials, your milk, your eggs, your cheese, those just take what you need and leave some for others, because there's no need to panic buy at this time.
Food bank use is still much higher than it was before the pandemic, and December is typically their busiest month of the year. This holiday season likely to be harder than most, though Hussein and her volunteers have already weathered a crisis or two.
Keep telling it to everybody, the pandemic has taught us so many good lessons, and it has definitely equipped us to tackle these changes.
Food banks hoping the uncertainty of the moment will inspire people to donate rather than hoard. Michelle Gussoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Coming up, worldwide reaction to the new Omicron variant, more on Canada's new restrictions and what other countries are doing. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, the owners of a historic property south of Halifax are selling their land to a Mi'kmaq group. As Taryn Grant reports, the group plans to use the land for healing and educational programs.
Jim and Margaret Drescher moved their family here, to Windhorse Farm, in 1990. To begin, they made a living from gardening and logging. Over the years, they've added off-grid cottages and a lodge. It's a popular place for retreats, vacations, and weddings. But Margaret says those things don't explain all that Windhorse is. She calls it the magical place.
There's so much about these 200 acres. There's sort of the factual part about it, but there's also the feeling part of it. And it feels like it feels like home. And it feels like home to many people when they come here. They kind of go, yeah.
The property is home to old and diverse forests, including one particularly old stand of eastern hemlocks. The Dreschers estimate the trees have been growing for many hundreds of years. There's also Mother Maple, a solitary old tree that holds a mystery.
We can tell that it grew in an opening, and yet that happened before settlement here. So the riddle is why? Why was this an opening for this tree for like 100 years to grow in this form?
One guess is it was a place for Mi'kmaq ceremony. It could become that once again, as the Ulnaweg Education Center takes over for the Dreschers this week. Jim and Margaret are selling Windhorse Farm below market value in the spirit of reconciliation. The deal has been more than 3 years in the making.
The elders that we've brought here since then, I've noticed the impact that it has had on them personally, just being in this space.
Gugu says the impact is one of healing. He hopes to share that with more people as Ulnaweg starts offering educational programs at Windhorse. Some of that work has already started.
It's a new circle with a sacred fire here that we can gather around and leave our titles, leave our hierarchical colonial titles, and just sit in a very safe space as equals here.
Gugu says he wants children to come and learn about nature from the land. Windhorse will also remain available for other people to visit, and the Dreschers won't be far away. They've moved just up the road and say they'll continue to wander the woods alongside the new owners. Taryn Grant, CBC News, Lunenburg County.
Canada has announced tougher measures against the Omicron variant, an expanded travel ban and expanded testing at airports. And we are just one of dozens of countries with bans focused on Africa. But as Susan Ormiston explains, most of the countries with confirmed cases are on other continents, which throws the origins of and response to Omicron in doubt.
It's a certainty. No matter what borders close or open, COVID-19 travels and the variant has been circulating for a while. The Netherlands has found Omicron in 2 cases nearly a week before South Africa first reported it.
This person had contact with a person who had just returned from South Africa. It could also be that we cannot find the source anymore.
Omicron, with its spiky profile, has now emerged in dozens of places. Japan and Israel, which closed borders, also in France, UK, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and Germany. Omicron identified there in a man with no travel history. We fear December, January, and February and believe things will be more difficult. So with the origin in question and transmission widening, Southern Africans say travel bans singling out their countries are unjustified. South Africa now tied to Omicron, even if unfairly, says the CDC.
Identifying a virus, a new strain or a new variant doesn't mean it came from there. It just means that good systems in place to pick it up.
Concerns now that countries monitoring a new COVID variant might be reluctant to report it first. At a U.S. briefing, the CDC director made a point of praising South Africa.
Their collaboration has allowed us to make evidence-based decisions quickly.
But there are still more unknowns than facts. How severe is the illness from the variant, and how effective will vaccines be against it?
The White House is considering stricter testing for all international travelers, regardless of vaccination, and weighing a possible self-quarantine. President Biden is due to update his coronavirus strategy on Thursday. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Washington.
Now, those who are still unvaccinated here in Canada found their world getting a little smaller today. Anyone over the age of 12 now has to show proof of vaccination before boarding a plane or a train. As Alison Northcott found out, not everyone was up to speed on the new rules.
Cora McCloy is about to hop on a train to Toronto from Montreal and says knowing those on board with her are also vaccinated makes traveling a lot more appealing.
It's made me feel like I can travel, and I don't do a lot of travel. It's just that one small trip was great to get away.
That's sticker. At the train station in Montreal, Via Rail agents handed out these orange stickers to travelers who proved they're vaccinated.
If you want to go train, you show the security guard, yes, I take the vaccine.
As he prepared to board a plane to Saskatoon, Dave Stockman knew he'd need to show vaccine proof.
It was hard for me because I don't know how to do it on the phone. I'm not tech savvy like some of these kids.
William Moore was on his way to BC for work, but says he couldn't get on his flight because his second shot was less than 14 days ago.
It's pretty pissed off right now. I can't travel. They just changed it yesterday. I'm going to work. I'm not going for some tourist activities. I mean, come on.
The rules have officially been in place since the end of last month, but now the grace period is over and travelers and airlines need to adjust.
That's a practice that's not part of their normal way of doing business. And they have to get trained, and they have to get to understand what they have to look for, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And that whole process is going to add time.
I showed up early, but as far as taking longer, to be honest with you, it's been a while since I've flown, so I don't really know, if it's any longer. Or...
By and large, vaccination is the best way.
This expert says vaccines for travel are an extra precaution in the face of uncertainty around the Omicron variant and a potential vaccine incentive, too.
I think that is a big motivator. I mean, there's a lot of people who haven't seen their relatives in a couple of years, so they were kind of hoping that this might be that year.
But for those still without the shots, travel options are now much more limited. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Barbados has become the world's youngest republic today after it shed a defining marker of its colonial past. Here in BC, a flag-raising ceremony was held in Surrey to commemorate the occasion. The event was organized by the Barbados Cultural Association of BC. Those who attended say the country can now stand on its own and that it needed to shed ties to the monarchy because it's rooted in colonialism. Governor General Sandra Mason was sworn in as the Caribbean island nation's first ever president at a ceremony attended by Prince Charles in Barbados. Thomas Dagla was there.
Well, this is the National Honors Ceremony here in Bridgetown, Barbados. An important moment every year in this country, but especially significant this year because the awards are being handed out in honor of the new Republic of Barbados, not in the name of Queen Elizabeth. Perhaps the most significant award today, certainly the one that got the biggest reaction from the crowd here, going to Rihanna, the global pop superstar and entrepreneur from Barbados. She told the crowd that she will be a Bajan till the day she dies.
This is a day that I would never, ever forget. It's also a day that I never saw coming. Barbadians are proud people, We are probably the proudest people I know. And no matter where I go in the world, I take that pride with me. No matter where we go, the world is going to know that we Bajan to the bone.
Now, overnight, Barbados ditched Queen Elizabeth after nearly 400 years of British colonial ties on this island. Remember, it was in 1625 that the English first arrived, and British elites then from the 17th to the 19th century used African slaves for hard labor in the sugar plantations here. So for many people, this is a very meaningful moment in this country's history, and the question now is, will other Caribbean nations follow. There are still 15 countries around the world where Queen Elizabeth is the head of state. Most of them are in the Caribbean.
Barbados used to be known as Little England. Barbados was Britain's mother colony in the Caribbean. And if Little England can make that break, then it says to the others that you can do it too.
People here in Barbados feel their new status as a republic will bolster their case for reparations from the British for that slave labor imposed on Africans here from the 17th to the 19th century. They don't see this day as the end of a story, but rather a new beginning. Thomas Dagg, the CBC News, Bridgetown, Barbados.
With roads closed, pipelines stopped, and rail lines clogged, it's a hard time to try to move product from place to place. We speak to the head of the BC Trucking Association about the challenges the industry is facing next.
The Fraser has hurtled out of the mountain passes and overflowed its banks to cover thousands of acres of rich land in one of the most beautiful valleys in the world with the muddy waters of disaster. A new and terrible kind of desert suddenly appears, a desert of water. Only the trees and the tops of barns and houses still hold their heads above the flood. From the Black Wednesday that the Agassiz dikes broke, the tragic story moved with breathtaking speed toward its terrible climax. Community after community wavered and fell before the onslaught of the river. Every 24 hours brought fresh reports of disaster. Crops disappeared under the muddy waters. Valuable equipment and homes built by years of effort were swallowed up in the ever-widening Fraser. The last week of May 1948 will be remembered by the people of the Fraser Valley as a week of brutal tragedy. For miles, there were no longer the neat fields and fences, the pleasant farms and pastures and country roads, but only a waste of dirty water dotted with the rooftops of barns and houses. Whole communities were isolated and others engulfed by water. And all the time, the Fraser moved on relentlessly, rising each day as the melting snows poured their enormous weight into its headwaters. By now, the flood was recognized as a major disaster and began its long sojourn on the front pages of the newspapers. And by now, too, the full facilities of the Canadian Red Cross had swung into the battle. With the willing assistance of transportation companies and private individuals, the mass evacuations of flooded areas began. In some cases, evacuation by normal means was impossible, and the Army Duck went back on active service, this time on a mission of mercy. One of the farmers' greatest worries was for the safety of their livestock. Valuable sheep, in many cases, had to be taken to safe ground in rowboats. Each sheep had to be carried to shore, where they waited trussed up and panting in animal terror. Cows are one of the most important assets in the Fraser Valley. Many of them, marooned on high ground, were badly in need of milking. Every truck that could be pressed into service was utilized in an effort to rescue these animals. On Friday, May the 28th, the provincial government authorized the use of troops to aid in evacuation. Sailors became familiar and welcome sights to valley residents cut off by the floodwaters. Many communities found their streets turned into rivers and their houses into islands. Gone were the gardens hidden behind picket fences. Now, only the picket fences peered mournfully over the scene of desolation.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News. With a case of the new Omicron variant of COVID identified in BC, the province is changing rules on religious gatherings. Now, everyone at places of worship must wear masks. Religious services can also only be held at 50% capacity unless every single participant is vaccinated. Starting today, 29 officers from the Surrey Police Service are being paired with Surrey RCMP officers to patrol the city. It's part of a staggered transition where Surrey Police and the RCMP will work together for the next few months. In the next few weeks, another 21 Surrey police officers will hit the streets with their RCMP counterparts. And during this transition period, the new officers will drive RCMP vehicles.
We have hundreds of thousands of bags.
Volunteers have been going hard for more than 2 weeks, battling the heavy rain and flooding in many parts of the province. Tonight, Maple Ridge and Mission are being hit hard with a downpour. There are evacuation orders in place in the Hatzic area of Mission. An ongoing supply chain issue throughout COVID has been made much worse by the flooding in BC. Millions of dollars worth of goods and food is simply stalled. Orders have also been canceled. Tonight, I'm speaking with Dave Earle, president of the BC Trucking Association. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
The conditions on many of BC's highways right now are not ideal. The whole system is in flux. I'm hearing that drivers have decided to simply take a back seat for the moment because it's not worth the risk of getting stuck for days. What are your members telling you about this?
Well, there's certainly some reluctance amongst some drivers, particularly those that aren't used to driving through mountain passes. I think one of the things that we forget is how difficult it can be, and to give people some comfort and some skill takes time and practice. So while we're hearing some of that, certainly some goods are moving, but particularly when we anticipate highways closing, a lot of vehicles won't leave their terminals because they don't want to get stranded.
And many industries say trucking rates have doubled, even tripled in some cases, partly because of what's already been happening and then now fewer trucks on the road. They say this is preventing the movement of goods and increasing prices for the consumer. They're essentially accusing your industry of price gouging. What do you say to that?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind is when we're going through this process, it's taking more than double the time to get goods from where they are to where they want to be. For example, in the past, a driver could do a run from Kelowna in 6 hours, turn around and come back. That's not possible. They're taking at least 12 hours to get there. And in those circumstances, you run out of time on your day. So you're looking at an overnight stay, then you're looking at another run coming back down of similar time. The costs have absolutely exploded. Even though, we don't have it's not twice the distance, your fuel bill is much higher because these vehicles are not running at speed. They're idling for hours at a time. So the costs have absolutely escalated far more than anybody could have anticipated.
Well, and with all of that being said and all of these supply issues, backups at the port, closed highways, we know that those truckers are also suffering. We've heard from some of them. This is their livelihood. How much of a loss do you think these drivers are taking?
It really depends on the driver. It depends if they're an owner operator and what contracts they have in place. A number of the large fleets have what are called company drivers. They're paid by the hour, so they continue to run, and that's when you get those huge escalations in costs. For the independent operators that have small one-off contracts, it's a really difficult environment to operate in because they don't know how long it's going to take them to make a given run. If you book a contract to move a given set of goods on a given day, you want to be able to deliver on that contract. And right now, they just don't know. We're really hopeful that as we move into the coming days and certainly into next week, we're going to see a stabilization where we have some consistent running time and some ability to actually have some consistency in that supply chain and let people understand and predict their costs to be able to run.
Well, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but can you give me a sense of what a normal time would be like for the trucking industry in terms of movement of goods and how that compares to right now?
Sure. So here's an example. I talked about Kelowna, a little bit of run. Another standard run, if you will, is from the Lower Mainland to Edmonton. We're hearing from our members that where that run wouldn't be doable in a day, particularly this time of year, where what we call a rounder, where they'd be able to go up and back in a period of time and be able to have a switch point. Those rounders are now taking 65 to 70 hours just to be able to move up there and be able to come back. What that does is it's not only the amount of time behind the wheel that gets stretched, it's the amount of time to complete the journey and be able to turn around. We have to be mindful that drivers are just like you and I, they get tired. And as much as we have exemptions in certain circumstances narrowly defined for hours of service, We want to make sure that drivers are safe behind the wheel, and that's why it's so important that they and companies manage their hours so tightly. It just means it takes a lot longer for stuff to get where it needs to be.
Absolutely. Safety is key, and so many people relying on truckers right now for their movement of goods, but there are a lot of things playing a part here. Dave Earle, president of the BC Trucking Association, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's a dubious distinction, but the Yukon has taken over BC for a number of fatal drug deaths, the health crisis in the north after the break. And at 6:44, you were looking at a live shot down Georgia Street, downtown Vancouver. The rain still battering the province tonight, but there is some sun on the way. Johanna has her full forecast coming up.
I know it's our last day. Let's just go out with a bang and make sure everybody is aware that, you know, this is it. Okay. So thank you.
We've been talking a lot about our own capacity as a family to keep this restaurant.
Very sad to see it closing, and I will miss it.
There's a beauty in having an elegant closure of an entity, of a life.
Growing up, we didn't have anybody to look at.
I wanted my community, the youth, to connect with the mainstream through the game of basketball.
Nav became the person that we could identify with.
He's been just as important as any player the Toronto Raptors has ever had.
He's a super diehard, loyal fan.
One and only super fan, Anita Bathe.
Anita Bathe.
Anita Bathe, the super fan.
Yeah!
He's always at the games, never missed one home game.
If there is breath in his body, he's going to be there for the Toronto Raptors.
You keep kind of scratching your head wondering,
who is that guy?
Who is this guy? Who is that guy?
I was like, does he work here?
Hey, Fraser!
Standing up and yelling, and I'm like, already you're an immigrant, you look different, and now you're doing all of this.
All the Canadian fans are taking pictures with him and all this stuff, and you scratch your head even some more and thinking about what's this specialness that he has.
And you know what, that's it. I want to know that guy.
He's got that it factor that draws people to him.
All the fans, media people, everything's turned to him.
He almost became this myth. And then you figure out that that guy is just like us. He has the same stories like us.
The things he's done are so real. They're so tangible for so many people.
It's almost been a parallel path of the team that went on to become NBA champions. And this great success story that is Anita Bathe.
There's fans, and then there's a super fan.
The Vancouver Whitecaps have officially named Vanni Sartini as the head coach.
I'm happy, excited, I'm thankful and to the club and honored also that the club decided to continue with me after this, I would say, crazy but very beautiful 3 months that when I stepped as an interim head coach.
Sartini has signed on to a new 2-year contract that will see him lead the team through 2023. Sartini took the reins on an interim basis on August 27th after the ousting of former head coach Mark Dos Santos. Under the new leadership, the Whitecaps made it on to the playoffs for the first time since 2017. Time now to check in again with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. And Joe, I think the only thing to say is that it's safe to say everyone is exhausted from this.
Anita, you just summed it up. Yes, it has been relentless. The third storm in less than a week, less than 24 hours between. And this is all following our major event, our unprecedented event of November 13th to 15th. But the end is in sight. Let me get you there, but start off with what's happening right now. You can see rain is actually tapering for parts of Metro Vancouver. This atmospheric river has a bit of a bend in it, so we're actually going to see the next overnight and morning period come in waves. Notice out towards Chilliwack and North Vancouver where I am, it is still coming down fairly heavily. So let me get you through the long range. We'll see a few more pulses tomorrow morning. I think we have one more pulse tomorrow afternoon as that river sinks south. And then as we head into Wednesday evening and Thursday, just showers. And I actually think we'll see some blue skies both Thursday and Friday across the south coast. Now there's a little bit of a system tracking towards Metro Vancouver for the weekend. It is not an atmospheric river. It is just a few rounds of rain. Nothing like the intense systems we've been getting. Here's another look at those pulses I was mentioning. I'm just letting this run. You can see that time stamp up top running through to Thursday early morning hours. There's some break in the clouds. Thursday, mainly sunny, and it will be dry through to Friday before we get that weekend rain. Again, nothing like what we've seen. And it is the end of the month today. I'll be adding up those numbers for tomorrow. Many stations across the south coast, including Vancouver, Victoria, Tofino, Nanaimo, Abbotsford, all smashing our wettest month ever on record. Many places seeing more than double what we would normally get for this time of the year. So let me break down that forecast. Steady rain continuing for much of the south coast for Wednesday. It is still quite mild. We will still see snow levels overnight tonight up around and above 2,000 meters. So melt continues as we speak. We get that break through Thursday, much needed break. And notice behind that cold front, because the back end of an atmospheric river is always a cold front. So temperatures cool back down, snow levels will drop. We'll see some fresh snow towards next weekend for the mountains. But look at those 2 solid days, more than we've seen in over a week of dry conditions. Saturday and Sunday, as I mentioned, a few showers. I'll be looking at those totals, maybe 10 to 20 millimeters at this point for Metro Vancouver. But with those 2 days for water to filter through the watershed, we should be good for that weekend event. And Anita, the Thursday day, even though we're looking at sunshine, Thursday is also when we might see some of our rivers late peak. So the rain will be done. We might have to wait till Thursday afternoon until we're fully in the clear.
Okay, we'll be keeping a close eye on all of that. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Let's go to the Yukon now, where officials are dealing with a worsening health crisis that's all too familiar to British Columbians. The territory has the highest rate of deaths due to the toxic drug crisis in Canada. Juanita Taylor looks at the impact the crisis is having and what's being done about it.
This place has many memories for Gary Bailey. It's where he and his daughter Stassity loved to ski.
And I prayed every day for my girl, and really sad to lose her, but at the same time, it was so hard to see her suffer day to day.
In October, the 27-year-old died of an opioid overdose.
She really wanted to get better, but could just never seem to really get to that point.
We're in a deep crisis.
Since 2016, 54 people in the Yukon have lost their lives due to opioids, more than a third of those deaths just this year. All of them are related to fentanyl, a drug 50 times more powerful than heroin.
We have to now stand up and have the courage to face this head on, to try to make a difference together. This is not sustainable.
The pandemic has made the opioid crisis in the Yukon even worse, with the drug supply becoming more toxic and more people suffering in isolation.
It's no longer a crisis. It's a full-blown emergency.
Chief Doris Bill says her Kwanlin Dun First Nation provides naloxone kits to the public. They've also distributed educational material and put money into treatment centers. But she says it's not enough and wants the federal government to step in.
First Nation people are being disproportionately affected here. I think this situation needs as much urgency as the COVID situation does.
The Yukon government recently opened a supervised consumption site in Whitehorse. Gary Bailey wants to see more supports like that. Until then, he has a message for others struggling with addiction.
You're cared for and loved, really not to give up hope.
And he hopes more help will be on the way soon. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Yellowknife.
A bird on the loose in New Brunswick. Winston the pheasant might be missing, but he's not been unsighted. That's next.
Ryan, to the untrained eye, this just looks like a table of dirt with some shapes to it. What are we actually looking at?
This is actually fragments of a skull. So we've got the better part of the skull. So the tip of the snout is facing you here with the teeth pointing my way. And then these pieces off to the sides are the lower jaws. And it's part of a big marine reptile called a prognathodon that have these huge T-Rex sized teeth and are informally referred to as the T-Rex of the sea. So they're these really large marine reptiles that were swimming around Saskatchewan about 75 million years ago.
Wow. Now, where was this found?
This is from the West Block of Grasslands National Park, and it's from a rock layer called the Bear Paw Shale that stretches across all of, or the better part of southern Saskatchewan, and during a time when we had a shallow seaway stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to the Arctic Ocean.
So when did you find it?
The tip of the snout was actually found back in 2012 by a local landowner, and Parks Canada partnered with us. We were able to get back out there in a more meaningful way this past summer to collect some of these pieces that you're seeing behind the tip of the snout. So it was kind of an exciting discovery for us and a neat addition to the fossil record of Saskatchewan.
Okay, so back in the day, tell me a little bit about this creature.
Well, this would have been something that ate pretty much anything it wanted to. So it has very large crushing teeth that are also good for slicing. And in terms of the mouth, basically it stretches from about here to about here. So we would have been sort of two-bite morsels for an animal this large. And the animal itself would have been pushing 10 meters in body length. So absolutely huge. The artist's reconstruction on the wall there sort of gives you some sense of what it would have looked like as a complete animal. But swimming around sort of a shallow subtropical sea back then.
So we're all kind of familiar with Scotty and that discovery. Was this a friend or foe to Scotty?
Slightly different time period. So Scotty would have been around 67 million years ago. This would have been further back in time, around 75 million years ago. But yeah, if they were in the same setting, they would have been comparable sized animals. This would have been just a few feet shorter than Scotty in total body length. So an absolute beast.
So how important is this discovery?
It's neat for Saskatchewan because it's the first example of this group that we have in the province, and it adds to the fossil records. So there's a few other individuals known from Alberta, but they're smaller individuals, and a lot of the stuff that we're finding in Saskatchewan from marine reptiles is specific to Saskatchewan. So we're sort of this neat endemic or local fauna that's going on. So it may, as we find more of this material, build out our picture of what's going on back then.
So right now it's not ready for display, but the goal is to get it up into the museum?
Yeah, we're hoping to include this as part of upcoming exhibits, but again, we're relying on finding more of the material in coming summer. So we're hoping to get back out on the slopes when the snow melts and hopefully find the rest of the skull and continue the series of neck vertebrae that are running towards the end of the table. It was coming out of the hill snout first, so we're hoping the rest of it's hiding in there.
Wow, well, happy digging. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Oh, thank you.
A golden pheasant from New Brunswick has flown the coop. Winston's been missing for a few weeks, but as Kate Letterick is finding out, the bright yellow bird has recently been spotted on social media.
It was about 2.5, 3 weeks ago.
We looked and he wasn't there. And it went on. We thought he was gone. We really did. We thought something had eaten him.
What was your reaction when he popped up on Facebook?
I was quite shocked. My daughter actually sent me a picture of him and she said, that looks like Winston. And I said, it probably is Winston.
And where was he when he popped up on Facebook?
He was just outside of Shediac on a little road called Glassby, and there's an old folks home there. So the old folks have been enjoying him, I think. There must have been a hole in the pen that we haven't noticed. Now, we've shored up his pen again now. So we'd like him back so he can enjoy his pen.
And he has a friend here who's missing him.
Yes, he does. He has a mate. He has a mate, it's a red pheasant. And she's missing him a great deal. If you attempt to catch him, you have to use either a fishing net or a light blanket from a bed. And you have to be super gentle because his little legs and his little wings will break like crazy. But it can be done. That's how we catch him. We catch him with a fishing net.
How long has he been on the run now?
It is about 2.5, 3 weeks that he's been on the lam.
The bird is on the lam.
Yes, the bird is on the lam.
What a beautiful bird. Hopefully found soon, but having a good time, it seems, for sure. Thank you for watching CBC Vancouver News tonight. We are back tomorrow, and Dan will be updating the flooding situation tonight at 11.